Hello and welcome to Inside Sports. I'm your host, Todd Blackstock. We have a fun show for you today, and we'll be heading over to the Cardinals winter warm-up where we'll meet Dr. Raymond Doswell, the Vice President of the Negro League Baseball Museum. Plus, Ed Wheatley will join us to discuss his new book about the forgotten St. Louis Browns. Plus, local musician Brian Clark will join us for a cool tune about the old Sportsman's Park. So stay tuned for this and much more coming up next on Inside Sports. Off today with a sneak peek from the 2019 St. Louis Cardinals winter warm-up and look into how integrating Major League Baseball affected the former Negro Leagues. Out here at the 2019 Cardinals winter warm-up, the place is packed, obviously. There's lots of fun things to do. Players, managers, alumni, like Mike Shannon, Mike Claiborne, all kinds of festivities. I mean, this place is jamming, great vibe, all kinds of memorabilia being sold. And neat things like Cardinals announcer John Rooney interviewing the such of guys like General Manager Mike Gersh.
Got in mind that those questions are going to be asked by a Stubby Clapp, a Willie McGee, the right
information, the same data. We have a group.
And all kinds of festivities and celebrities coming through the doors here at the 2019 winter warm-up. Is obviously family friendly, and if you bring the kids along, you want to bring them to the kids zone where they can come in here and jump around in all kinds of different apparatus, and they can work on their pitching and hitting skills. Let's take a look. What makes it fun to come to the winter warm-up?
I just like to get all the players' autographs.
So how long have you been playing baseball?
Probably about 3 years.
3 years now, huh? And what is it you like so much about baseball?
I like hitting and playing outfield and stuff.
You recommend, a lot of kids and people to come out to this event?
Yes, sir. It's a very fun one.
All right, what's your favorite part of the winter warm-up?
Just all the activities and meeting players.
Who's your favorite Cardinal player?
Matt Carpenter.
Hey! Right? I got it. It's winter warm-up 2019 for the St. Louis Cardinals, best baseball team ever.
And joining us now in our Black History Month piece is Dr. Raymond Doswell, the Vice President of the Negro League Baseball Museum in Kansas City. And Dr. Doswell, thank you so much for joining us here. I just saw your presentation. It was very, very excellent, and I applaud you for it and keeping alive the memories of the Negro Leagues.
Well, we're happy to do that, and St. Louis plays a very important part in that history. As one of the major teams, the St. Louis Stars and the St. Louis Giants are one of the early teams, so we're happy to preserve that history both for St. Louis, Kansas City, and all over the country.
We've done some Black History Month pieces over the year, and my first contact with the museum, Buck O'Neill answered the phone, and he recommended we talk to George Altman. It was George Altman, and George gave us a tremendous interview. Guys like Tom Maltzman, George Altman, they were just tremendous figures, in baseball for the Negro Leagues and in Major League Baseball.
Well, folks like Mr. Alston and Mr. Altman certainly stand on the shoulders of many great baseball players before them. African Americans have been playing baseball since the late 1800s, and then, of course, development of the professional Negro Leagues paved the way for athletes like them to be able to have an opportunity to play. Now, yes, there was basketball and there was boxing and there were other opportunities, but thank goodness that the Negro Leagues existed so that they had an opportunity to apply their skills, and then we could still have them available to play Major League Baseball later.
You know, there was the barnstorming leagues like during the off season, you know, where the black teams would come in and play like the Yankees or the Cardinals. And the Negro League teams did pretty well, didn't they?
They fared very well. They had a great record against white baseball teams, and they were very popular. And not just on the major teams or against major players, but with a lot of different communities around the country, black and white. They were able to travel, for example, the Kansas City and St. Louis teams could travel all up and down each side of the state of Missouri and into Illinois and into Kansas, and they drew a great following among black and white fans, and they were very popular, and many folks remember them fondly.
Speaking with Buck O'Neill, he was mentioning how when the Negro Leagues were there, that things were separate. You know, you had to stay in different hotels, but there were some nice African-American hotels. There was some nice eateries as well, but once the integration occurred, a lot of the African-American baseball players, you know, they couldn't eat with the teams, and sometimes when they traveled, they had issues and things like that.
It was a struggle first for a lot of players like Jackie Robinson and those who came from the Negro Leagues initially, because the different laws in different places were not accepting of whites and blacks staying in the same accommodations or riding in the same accommodations. But it took baseball as a popular sport to break a lot of that down. And the baseball players in many respects were the ones who helped crack that door open for the rest of society. Jackie Robinson in particular was someone who fought very strongly against that injustice, and in many respects he became the first person to stay at certain hotels in certain communities and be able to dine in certain dining rooms, and they were very adamant about that, and thank goodness for it, because what that did was they could see that it was just stupid to have such rules, and that one, blacks and whites can play well in the arena, play on the playing field, they can communicate together, they can work together, and again it opened the eyes of those who were just not progressive enough to think forward.
I tell you what, folks, when you're in Kansas City, do yourself a favor. You can hit some barbecue like Arthur Bryant's. I think that's what it's called. It's in walking distance to the Negro League Baseball Museum, so you can have a little Kansas City barbecue, walk on over to the Negro League Baseball Museum. That they're going to show you a film when you walk in. There's a loop with Buck O'Neill comments on different TV shows. And what else can you tell our viewers about the Negro League Baseball Museum and why they should come see you?
Well, we want you to come, whether you're from St. Louis or from any kind of community where there were African Americans. They usually had a baseball team that was part of that, and you will come and you'll learn all that history, the connections to broader African American history. And even if you're not a baseball fan, and in fact it's those non-baseball fans that I really want to come, you'll get an understanding of what it was like to live during those times. And baseball is just one aspect of African American history that helped paved the way for many other aspects of the civil rights movement. So you learn really what happened between the Civil War and the beginnings of the civil rights movement, and baseball's kind of bridge through that story. So you come in, you'll see hundreds of photographs and artifacts and life-size bronze statues of some of the key players in Negro League's history. We have a store as well, and folks can come, they can support us through membership, they can get on our Facebook page, and yes, there's plenty of barbecue in Kansas City, and you will have to walk it off when you come.
Dr. Doswell, thank you very much for joining us on STL TV. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
In 2019, Jackie Robinson would have turned 100. And Major League Baseball is celebrating this whole year, commencing with the opening of the Jackie Robinson Museum this December. And you can see the entire interview with Dr. Doswell on STL TV's YouTube channel. Well, the St. Louis Browns played baseball for over 50 years in St. Louis. And on our Inside Sports Flashback, we take a look at the greatest Brown of all. George Sisler grew up as part of a prominent family in Akron, Ohio. George, along with brothers Bert and Cassius, loved sports, and George honed his skills as a youth in Barberton, Ohio. He was so highly regarded that he was recruited to play baseball at the University of Michigan for a man that would become perhaps his closest friend in life.
Mr. Rickey was the coach at the University of Michigan, and that's where my grandfather met Mr. Rickey and played for him his freshman year up there, and that's how they first met.
After graduating from Michigan with an engineering degree in 1915, Sisler signed with the St. Louis Browns, shown here with team vice president Walter Fitch. The manager at the time was Branch Rickey.
He was very fast. His fielding average was superb. He covered more ground than most first basemen would cover at that age, because when he was in high school, he actually was a left-hander, but he played shortstop. At the University of Michigan, he was a pitcher. He came up as a pitcher.
As a southpaw, Sisler was considered an excellent pitching prospect, and he outdueled one of the best in history.
He played against Walter Johnson and beat him twice as a pitcher for the St. Louis Browns.
Sisler pitched 15 games his rookie year and had a career ERA of under 3 runs a game. But he was such a tremendous athlete, he had to play every day. And in 1917, he hit over 350. In 1918, Sisler was having a nice season, batting .341. But the season was suspended on Labor Day due to World War I. After the season, George joined the Army as a second lieutenant under Major Branch Rickey's Chemical Warfare Service. Sisler was designated for assignment overseas, but on November 11, 1918, the war ended and Sisler's baseball career entered a magnificent stretch of baseball excellence.
In 1920, he batted .407. That was the year he set his single-season hit record at that point in time.
And then 2 years later, he has .420 and is the MVP, and the Browns came within 1 game of winning the pennant. The lowly Browns almost won the pennant that year.
Sisler was also a man of great character.
He was not a carouser. He was not a drinker. He was not a smoker.
Sisler was on top of the world and was becoming a national icon. Gorgeous George was the first baseball player to be featured on the cover of Time magazine. But after the 1922 season, an illness struck Sisler, which derailed him in the prime of his career.
He evidently had a sinus infection in 1923, or before 1923, I mean right before the season, and it caused him to have double vision. And so he was not able to play through the whole year of 1923.
Sisler returned for the 1924 season and hit over 300, but never felt like he was the same player.
He was never satisfied with his ability to hit after that. I think his final year he may have been hitting 313, but that wasn't good enough for him to continue. He didn't think that was worth playing for anymore.
Sisler played 4 more years with the Browns, and after the 1927 season, he was sold to the Washington Senators for $25,000. After an uneventful start to the 1928 campaign, Sisler was dealt to the Boston Braves, where he batted well over 300 his last 3 years in the majors. After his playing career, he became a scout for Branch Rickey with the Brooklyn Dodgers and was a key player in breaking the color barrier with the signing and development of Jackie Robinson.
I have to believe that he was one of the scouts, if not the most important scout, that was talking to Mr. Rickey about Jackie Robinson's ability as an athlete and Jackie Robinson's ability mentally to be able to make that jump.
In the 1950s, Rickey took control of the Pittsburgh Pirates and brought Sisler on board, where he was very instrumental in the success of a Latin prospect named Roberto Clemente. Sisler was given a lifetime pass by Major League Baseball to attend any game free of charge for the rest of his years. He remained a St. Louis-based scout for the Pittsburgh Pirates the remainder of his life.
He loved St. Louis. He raised his children here in St. Louis. He lived down on Pershing. He's buried here in St. Louis. He grew up, he was from Ohio, went to school in Michigan, but St. Louis became his home.
Although Sisler played for the Browns, the Cardinals felt the need to honor his achievements with a statue outside of the new Busch Stadium.
George Sisler is the best Browns player that St. Louis saw. It's a natural that the Cardinals would recognize Sisler in their homage to the American League team that was here from 1902 to 1953.
He was definitely the greatest St. Louis Brown baseball player ever, and one of the greatest players in all of baseball history. He'll stand the test of time. His star will be in the St. Louis Walk of Fame forever.
Well, George Sisler was not only the greatest Brown of all, but one of the greatest to ever play the game. And joining us now is a man who knows a few things about the Browns, Mr. Ed Wheatley. Ed is the president of the St. Louis Browns fan club and has co-authored a book commemorating the team's tenure here in the STL. Ed, welcome to Inside Sports. How are you?
Enjoy it.
You know, it's coming out that George Sisler was a fantastic player, one of the greatest of all time, as we know that. But let's take it back to the beginning of the Roost, because a lot of people are confused about how the St. Louis Browns, or maybe the Cardinals, and then the Browns came. And can you maybe, quickly tell us how it all originated?
Yeah, it's been 66 years since the Browns played. The last played here in the '53 season. When the National League was formed in 1876, there was briefly a team in St. Louis, the St. Louis Brown Sox, and they folded. And over the period of 1876 to 1901, there were 31 teams in the National League. The Cardinals, what we know today, entered the National League in 1892, and they played their first season with the name Browns. Died to the history of the brown stockings in St. Louis. In those days, names were generated generally by the color of their socks. So they played from 1892 to 1901 when the American League was formed. But there was a team in Milwaukee that first year in 1901 called the Milwaukee Brewers. Well, the president of the American League, Ban Johnson, looked at St. Louis. He saw the Cardinals. They weren't a very good organization. They weren't well run, and they didn't have good players. And St. Louis was the fourth largest city, so he took the idea, I'm going to move the Milwaukee Brewers to St. Louis, and he named them the Browns. In the meantime, the Cardinals had been renamed the Perfectos. Many remember that name. And then based on the comments of several women sports writers, called them the Cardinals based on the lovely shade of red socks they had gone to. So that's how they became the Cardinals. The Browns came in as the Browns.
Now the Browns were actually the team of the city. They were more popular than the Cardinals, weren't they, for a long time?
Oh, for the first several decades, they were absolutely the best team in St. Louis. As I said before, the Cardinals were not that well run, or they did not have the best players. The Browns came in, they were ready to win. They actually went and stole two of the best players from the Cardinals and moved them over into the Browns. And they got off to a good start. They had a very strong love affair with the city. And they were building one of the big dynasties presumed for the American League going into the 20s. You had the team led by George Sisler. You just saw all his great credentials, one of the greatest men to ever play the game. Yet he's also probably one of the most forgotten men with his greatness, because today there's no one rallying his cause. And, it became a situation of a man who changed kind of the dynamo of the teams. His name was Branch Rickey. Branch Rickey had been a player, a coach, general manager of the Browns. He wasn't as good a ball player as he was an executive. He was a genius as an executive. And what happened was he clashed with implement his vision of a farm system, what is today the minor leagues. It did not exist in those days. You just went and took players from teams and got them to sign. He wanted to develop his own players. So what Branch Rickey, in his clash with the owner, Philip DeCatsby Ball of the Browns, he parted ways. He goes over to the Cardinals and builds the farm system over there with the Cardinals, which then leads to the great players that led to the World Series appearances by the Cardinals in 26, 28, 30, 31, 34, 42, 43, 44, 46. So sure, the Cardinals are all of a sudden the big winners, and the Browns, are the aftermath runners.
And the 44 World Series was the Cardinals and the Browns.
Absolutely. Here's the Cardinals and the Browns. And you think about the Browns, there's another part of that Branch Rickey story, and then we'll come back to this, is that Branch Rickey and the Cardinals stadium was Robinson Field over on Natural Bridge, just a few blocks from Sportsman's Park. It's today where Beaumont High School is. It was a fire trap, so it got condemned. Branch Rickey comes over and says, Philip Ball, I know you like money. I'm going to sign a long-term lease to play for you. So all of a sudden, he's not going to pay very much money to the Browns. And the Browns think I got this deal with a long term. All of a sudden, Branch Rickey doesn't have to pay to maintain a stadium or any of that. He invests in players. And so, it's been this back and forth between the Cardinals and the Browns for decades. The Browns finally get to the World Series. Who do they have to play?
The Cardinals.
The Cardinals. Their inner rival of the city.
Now, Bill Veeck was there, came on board with the Browns, did some funny things. We know he brought in the midget, or the short person. Man, the little guy, Eddie Goodell. And he tried to run the Cardinals out of town. Well, we got a couple minutes left.
Yeah, Bill Veeck, he had taken the Cleveland Indians to the World Series in 1948. Personal reasons, he had to sell his share. Then he looked down south. He saw in St. Louis the perfect storm. Here were the Cardinals. Fred Sy, the owner of the Cardinals, he's headed to jail for tax evasion. he also says, if I buy the Browns, remember, the Browns own the stadium, kick the Cardinals out. Cardinals are destined to go to Houston, except Augie Bush comes in and says, no, I think I can sell a lot of beer if I own a team. So he buys the Cardinals. Cardinals stay put. Bill Veeck, because he's pulling stunts like Eddie Goodell, stunts like grandstand manager, and things of that nature, he's forced to sell. And the Browns then go to Baltimore.
So the Browns go to Baltimore, and the Baltimore Orioles, their fans, their ownership groups wants absolutely nothing to do with the history of the Browns.
Well, they took the position in 1954. The Browns died and were buried in St. Louis. They did not come east. In 1901, as I spoke earlier, the American League was formed. There was a team in the American League, the original 8, Baltimore Orioles. But Ban Johnson moved that team in 1904 to New York to become what is the Yankees. So then Baltimore backfilled it with one of the greatest minor league franchises in all baseball history, and they choose to recognize that minor league franchise as their heritage, not the Browns. And part of it was, too, the tainted shenanigans of Bill Veeck had put a bad taste on, these guys are coming east. We'll stick with the franchise of the minors.
Well, tell us about your book. We got about a minute left here. I know it's very exciting, and you've got a lot of pictures and great things.
This is a book. Bob Costas helped with the book, did the forward, and it's a book that I always thought how baseball books should be written. It's a thing of vignettes and pictures.
You can hold it up.
And the vignettes are telling the story. And we load it with about 700 pieces of baseball memorabilia, and it's just loaded with fascinating small vignettes of stories. And the thing of it is, they are fascinating, but as a writer, you didn't have to make this stuff up because the Browns really did it. From Dizzy Dean, Dizzy Dean coming out of the broadcast booth to pitch a game because he said they were no good, I can do better, and he's out of baseball 6 years, so he comes down and throws shutout baseball.
We'll pick this up in just a minute because we've got musician Brian Clark and his bandmates, the St. Louis Browns, who have performed around the area for decades. Brian's written a song to pay homage to our city's baseball lore. Let's take a look.
St. Louis, Todd air meets grand. A little bit of heaven once occupied the land. It was a place where they played baseball while it stood on hallowed ground. It was the home of the St. Louis Cardinals and the home of the St. Louis Browns. Her gentle rams could lift you up high into the air. And if you can't believe in magic, you can't say that you were there. It was a summer night, and her towering lights could brighten up the dark. And they called the place Busch Stadium, but her name was Sportsman's Park. So take me out, take me out. Yes, if we don't win, it's a shame. Won't you take me out to Sportsman's Park? And the old ball game was 354 down the long left field line. And then above that was the scoreboard and the flying eagle sign. Home plate had to be 500 feet away, but Wally Post was stronger than most, and he bashed that bird one day. So take me out, so take me out. Well, if we don't win, it's a shame. Won't you take me out to Sportsman's Park and the old ball game? Now the short right field pavilion was measured at just 310, but in later years a screen was stretched that robbed a lot of men. Above the rooftops you could see the buildings across Grand, where kids would stand to watch homers land from Babe and Stan to Man. And from a garden deep in center field, a shining flagpole soared high above the golden gloves of Kurt Flood and Terry Moore. Well, I was watching from the grandstands, I saw it all and I'd enjoy how the magic of that ballpark made every man a boy. So take me out, take me out. Well, if we don't win, it's a shame. Won't you take me out to Sportsman's Park and the old ball game? Take me out, take me out. Well, we'll never be the same. Take me out to Sportsman's Park and the old ball game. On the north side of St. Louis, where yesteryear meets grand, a little bit of heaven once occupied the land.
What inspired you to write that song, and why did you name your band Brian Clark and the St. Louis Browns?
I wrote this song about Sportsman's Park because of the impact it made on me to walk in there for the first time. I don't know what I expected, but it exceeded that. And so it has made an impression that has nothing has ever actually topped that.
And then, so you decided to name your band, you went into music, and
you're
Brian Clark and the St. Louis Browns.
Right, so the band was formed in 1984, which is part of the reason, because that was the 40th anniversary of the Streetcar series. And besides how much I loved St. Louis, I wanted to tie the band's name in with St. Louis. Plus, baseball was my second passion behind music. So I've always wondered why no one has done anything about it.
And before we let you go, Ed, I know St. Louis Browns for Black History Month, they were very instrumental in bringing African Americans into Major League Baseball.
Oh, absolutely. Bill DeWitt Sr., the father of the Cardinals owner, they signed Hank Thompson and Willard Brown. They were the third and fourth men to play in the major leagues shortly after Jackie Robinson and Larry Doby. And the Browns put them both, they were so on the field at the same time, so they were the first team to have two African American players at the same time. Bill DeWitt felt that we needed good players, and we also wanted to bring the black community into Sportsman's Park. And it's an event that not many people know about.
Congratulations on the book, and congratulations on the film. The St. Louis Browns, what's it called?
The Team Baseball Forgot.
The Team Baseball Forgot.
Narrated by John Hamm.
John Hamm. So you've won a lot of awards with that, haven't you?
That's correct. We have a lot of awards.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to get more in depth, St. Louis Browns, the story of a beloved team. You can get this at all the local
stores.
All the
online.
local stores. To get this online, you can go more in depth because we barely scratched the surface of this here today. Yeah. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on Inside Sports. We appreciate it. That's our show for today. Thanks for watching Inside Sports. We'll see you next time.